Hi, I'm Elizabeth, and not only did I grow up in a cult, but I went to a college that some people might call a cult. But the fun thing about my college is they actually changed the rules because of me. At least that's the working theory I have, and it hasn't been disproven yet, so we're just gonna run with that theory today. This week marks 3 years since I graduated college, and I thought, why not? Why don't I make a YouTube video talking about good old Bob Jones University, my experience, the handbook, and what I learned going to a college that is borderline a cult. I mean, it depends on who you ask. I don't often call it a cult because I did grow up in a cult and it's better than where I grew up, but it also has cult-like tendencies. It definitely was a cult when it was started, and I think it has matured and gotten better over the years, but it might be regressing. So let's talk about that. So why does Bob Jones exist? Well, Bob Jones was founded in the mid-1900s. I am now looking at their Wikipedia page. I'm learning some things about it that I didn't even know, such as the Bob Jones motto is "We seek, we trust." Did not know that, never heard the motto. The university is 95 years old. It was founded in 1927. It was founded by Bob Jones the First, and it has had 3 chancellors, Bob Jones the First, Bob Jones Jr., and Bob Jones the Third. Now, if you're curious if the students are familiar with the Bob Jones family, they're all buried on campus, except for Bob Jones III, who is still alive and who is called Triple Sticks because of the 3 little letters by his name. But don't tell anybody he's called Triple Sticks. I don't know if that's, honestly, people said it affectionately, but he does speak in chapel, and I had to listen to his little ramblings, so that is something. So how did Bob Jones get started? So during the fundamentalist controversy of the 1920s, it was like, do you believe in evolution? Do you believe in creation? There was like a lot of issues in the 1920s for evangelicals who were trying to basically define what evangelical was, and the 1920s are the start of a lot of modern evangelical movements like Billy Sunday and a bunch of other people. In 1924, this famous dude, William Jennings Bryan, said, if schools and colleges do not quit teaching evolution as a fact, we are to become a nation of atheists. So that scared Bob Jones Sr., who was like, I don't want everybody growing up and becoming atheist. So he decided to found his own college. It originally was founded in Florida because of a Florida land boom, and then it did not go well and it moved to Cleveland, Tennessee. After the GI Bill in World War II, a bunch of young men returned from the army where they had converted to Christianity in the trenches, trench prayers, and they wanted to be preachers because of what they had experienced in the war, which if I had experienced the horrors of World War II in the battlefields, maybe I would want to be a preacher too. Anyway, they were looking around for a fundamentalist Christian college to go to, and Bob Jones was one of the prime colleges to attend, and the school outgrew its Tennessee campus and was looking around for somewhere else to go, and it ended up settling in Greenville, South Carolina. So some things about Bob Jones I think everyone should know. Interestingly enough, Martin Luther King Jr. was interested in attending Bob Jones, so he actually drove to the campus and visited and was actively thinking about enrolling because he wanted to be a preacher, but he realized the school was segregated and did not allow interracial dating, and that was not something Martin Luther King Jr. was interested in attending, a school that would segregate and racially discriminate against him, so he ended up not attending Bob Jones. So I just think it's a really interesting fact that everybody should know. And the Bob Joneses have always been very heavily involved in politics. In the 1920s, Bob Jones Sr. actively campaigned for the Populist Party and for William Jennings Bryan, who ran for president a lot. He also campaigned for Herbert Hoover in 1928, and then they played political hardball with the city of Greenville. In 1962, Bob Jones Sr. warned the Greenville City Council that he had 400 votes in his pocket, and in any election, he would have control over who the city elected. Bob Jones Sr.'s April 17, 1970 Easter Sunday sermon broadcast on radio was titled, Is Segregation Scriptural? It served as the university position on race in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. The transcript was sent in pamphlet form and fundraising and sold in the university bookstore. Bob Jones Sr. said, if you are against segregation and against racial separation, then you are against God Almighty. The school began a long history of supporting politicians who were aligned with the racial segregation. Now, this came back to haunt them because the IRS looked at Bob Jones and thought, the school is getting federal taxpayer exemption, but they are racially discriminating. So they decided to take away Bob Jones' tax-exempt status. And this is why Bob Jones is in the Supreme Court history textbooks. So they ended up taking away Bob Jones' tax-exempt status, and the school... Let me see if I can actually find it outside the Wikipedia page. We're going to look this up so I get the facts right. Bob Jones this is the facts of the case on oyez.org. Bob Jones University was dedicated to fundamentalist Christian beliefs, which included prohibitions against interracial dating and marriage. Such behavior led to expulsion. In 1970, the IRS changed its format policy to adopt a district court decision that prohibited the IRS from giving tax-exempt status to private schools engaging in racial discrimination. So Bob Jones fell in that line. This case was decided together with Goldsboro Christian Schools versus United States, in which Goldsboro... This is so fascinating. I didn't know this. I was born in Goldsboro. So it's like wild to read that there was a Christian school in Goldsboro that was part of this case, because I was born there. So somehow Bob Jones and me always tied. So what did the court decide? The court found that the IRS was correct in its decision to revoke the tax-exempt status of both BJU and the Goldsboro Christian School. These institutions did not meet the requirement by providing beneficial and stabilizing influence in community life to be supported by taxpayer with a special tax status. We love to see it. So BJU lost its tax-exempt status, and they actually regained it, I believe, in 2018 or 2017. While I was a student, it was very celebrated that Bob Jones had regained its tax-exempt status.
Tonight, you've seen his name in headlines. You may think you know his views, but do you? Bob Jones III, president of the very controversial Bob Jones University, is with us for the full hour, and we'll take your calls next on Larry King Live.
Because Bob Jones styled itself the most unusual university, and they are very unusual. So then they had a film department called Unusual Films, and Bob Jones Jr. loved the arts, loved theater, loved movies, and worked at releasing movies all the time. And there was one movie that ended up being my mom's favorite movie. It's still to this day, if you ask her what her favorite movie is, she's gonna say this movie. It is Sheffy. So Sheffy is about a preacher in the 1880s who is a circuit rider preacher, and as the church becomes more liberal, he takes a stance against liberal ideology, and on his deathbed basically sacrifices his life to save conservatism in his denomination. As you can imagine, for my parents, whose whole lives were dedicated to holding up conservatism and standing against liberal theology in churches, this kind of movie struck a chord. It spoke to them, and it made them feel validated in their life mission. So we watched Sheffy a lot growing up. We also used Bob Jones University textbooks. BJU Press still operates to this day, still is a Christian textbook provider. And so that is how we knew about Bob Jones. I didn't know it was a university. I just knew about the textbooks and the movies that we watched. How did I end up going to Bob Jones? So when I was 20 years old, I really wanted to go to college, and my dad had told me you can go to college when you're 21 because they would prefer I did not go to school at all. But my dad did say if you're interested in education, you can pursue something that you could be a stay-at-home wife through that degree, and you have to wait till you're 21 because in the Bible, going to college is like going to war, and in the Bible times you couldn't go to war till you're 21, and he considered college a cultural war zone, so he did not want his children going to school until they were 21 or older. So when I was 20, my younger sister was struggling with her education, and Bob Jones has a high school, and at the time they allowed teenagers to live on campus and attend the high school. And I knew that my sister was very, very unhappy at home, and my parents were not providing her the education that she needed. So I reached out to Bob Jones, and I said, if I'm enrolled as a college student, could I bring my younger sister with me to enroll in the high school, and we could live together in the dorms? I reached out in the fall, and I got a yes, and I also was accepted as a student, and then I attended in August. But between October, when I asked that question, and August, my sister had decided she definitely did not want to do that idea, and nobody was going to force her to do that, and I'm really glad she did not, because I think that would have been a bad idea anyway. No one should be going to college and living in dorms at 16 years old because your parents are horrible and not raising you correctly. That is a little side tangent, but that is how I ended up applying to Bob Jones, and I started as an education major. sadly, I do not have the 2015 handbook to show you all the rules that they had at the time I started. I do have the 2021 handbook, and I can share some changes that are different from the 2021, 2022 to 2015. The reason we're watching this video is there's a specific rule about sexuality that was changed after I was a student. But we can go through the handbook today, and I can show y'all some of the crazy rules at Bob Jones. It's kind of funny to me that I thought of this as freedom when I was a student, and now I'm like, wow. So you start off with the handbook with a letter from the president. The desire at BJU is to provide an unparalleled student experience centered on biblical thinking, engaged life, and life mentoring that prepares you for all aspects of life beyond college. I think that's really interesting because real life is very different from the matrix that Bob Jones has created. So let's go to some of the rules. I think that would be helpful. Student attire policy. With a desire to train students to learn, love, and lead, we believe that educating the whole person includes teaching appropriate attire for various occasions. The BJU attire policy requires modesty, appropriateness, and professionalism. By practicing these areas within an educational setting, we are preparing our students for success in the vocations they are diligently pursuing. So for women, hair should be neat and professional, a natural color. Shaved styles are not suitable. So the fact that I have my hair slightly shaved in the back, not allowed. Currently enrolled students are not allowed to get any henna, body art, tattoos, or piercings other than the ear or a small stud on the nose. Now, nose piercings were not allowed while I was a student ever. Tattoos that are present need to be covered if possible. No visible undergarments. Necklines should be high enough and tops long enough to be suitably modest. They're very, very picky about cleavage. If you choose to wear tops without sleeves, the tops should still cover the shoulder bones. The rule while I was there was 3 fingers across the shoulder bones. Hemlines and skirts should touch the knee. Slits are to be modest. Athletic shorts should approach the knee while being no shorter than 2 inches above it. Clothing should not have rips or holes. Now that is what you're allowed to wear to class except for the athletic attire. So you have to be very professional in class, in church, and then for casual attire, they do allow women may wear an athletic t-shirt, jeans that are well-fitting but not tight, athletic pants, and flip-flops. So that is the rule for women. So you can wear pants to class, but you cannot wear jeans to class. Now the pants to class did not change until I was a senior. So from the time I was a freshman, sophomore, and junior, we only could wear dresses and skirts to class. And then my senior year, they started allowing professional pants. They're very strict about what counts as professional or not. Do I really need to go over the men's styling? It's basically the same, but totally different. Clothing should not have rips or holes. Pants should be well-fitting. Currently enrolled students not allowed to get tattoos. Finger rings, wristbands, and a single necklace under a shirt is allowed. Earrings are not allowed for men. Oh, and they have very strict, like, no man buns, no sideburns. The hair has to be off the collar, ears, and eyebrows. Off the collar, ears, and eyebrows. So if I were a male student, that would not be allowed because I would have bangs in my eyes. I just think these rules are very fascinating, and I haven't looked at them in a while. So I just think that's fun. So those are the current clothing rules, and I will say they were much stricter when I was there. In 2015, they had just allowed pants to be worn after 5 p.m., and they were very, very strict about the kind of pants, and I do not know how strict they are with jeans to this day, but when I was there, if you were wearing jeans, you had to be able to pinch the fabric between your fingers in order to be considered not tight. I did have, on multiple occasions, people running up to me and telling me my clothing was inappropriate. I never intentionally wore what I considered inappropriate. One time someone thought my jeans were too tight. A second time my skirt was higher in the back than the front, and I had an old lady run up to me and chew me out because my knees were showing too much. Anyway, that was traumatic, and I was just trying to walk home from class. Anyway, when that happened, and I had no idea who that lady was, but she scared me. So that is the clothing rules. Now, let's talk about the rule that changed after I left. I do want to point out that the student handbook is very strict about its pro-life stance or anti-choice stance. We have a whole God values human life at its end and beginning, and if you are pro-choice on campus, you could get in trouble for that. My senior year gift ended up going to Save the Storks, which is not what it sounds like. It's a van that has sonograms that parks outside of women's reproductive clinics and then tries to convince women not to have abortions. And I did not want my money going towards that, but they fundraised for our senior class gift to pay for one of these $100,000 vans. And I never wanted my money to go towards that. And I wanted my senior class gift to go to something like new tennis courts on campus, or, you know, a new dorm makeover, or something beneficial to future students, not a Save the Storks van. And I specifically was not donating money in my name to my senior class gift because I was not interested in it. And one of the class presidents was fundraising and saw me, and I was like walking by, and he's like, "Hey, have you donated because you're a senior?" And I was like, "No, I don't have the money to donate," which was true. I didn't really have that much spare money my senior year. And he said, "No worries," and he put $1 in my name, even though I asked him not to. He just wouldn't listen to me. He's like, "We have to have 75% of seniors donate in order to have our gifts matched." And I was not interested in that, but he was like, "Well, if money's the problem," and I couldn't say, "Well, I don't want my money going to a pro-life van," then I would have gotten in trouble. And I was already in trouble at that point because of my sexuality. So moving on from the pro-choice, pro-life debate, which there was no debate on campus, you were pro-life or kicked out. Let's move to Appendix B in the student handbook, the position on marriage and human sexuality. Now, when I was a student, this is not what the student handbook said. I mean, the student handbook had their definition of marriage. They were like, the institution of marriage. Okay, I don't even remember what the student handbook said about what the institution of marriage is. I'm looking at what it says right now. And it's very strict. The institution of marriage has been valued by every culture and society throughout human history, which, what? I would like to see the anthropology on that. Bob Jones University believes marriage is an institution ordained by God and prescribed by Scripture to be a monogamous relationship between a man and a woman. Hello, King Solomon. I'm just saying that this is cherry-picking parts of the Bible. We believed God intended heterosexual marriage to be an enduring covenanted relation established between himself and man to propagate the human race, lovingly express healthy relations and sexual intimacy, and picture the covenant relationship he has with all genuine believers. All of these teachings existed when I was a student in 2016, 2017, and 2018. We have this whole little context for sexuality. It's part of God's divine design. The Bible restricts all forms of consensual sexual activity to within the boundaries of marriage. The Bible prohibits only non-consensual sexual misconduct, but any consensual activity outside the boundaries of marriage. And then they cherry pick verses to go with that. And then they condemn polygamy, incest, sexual activity between persons of the same sex, adultery, and fornication of any sort, including pornography. What bothers me most about their context for human sexuality passage is bestiality, polygamy, adultery, and homosexuality are linked all together. Bestiality is non-consensual. It's abuse of an animal. And you're going to link bestiality with polygamy, which is like two or more people deciding to open their relationship, when multiple biblical heroes like David, Abraham, Moses had more than one wife. I just find that interesting. It's mind-boggling. It's so irritating. And then we have a statement about gender identity. God created man and woman in his image as two distinct but equal genders, which he intends to use for his glory. Individual gender is assigned by God and determined at conception. Therefore, we believe that to intentionally alter or change one's gender or to live as a gender other than the one assigned at conception, like these people are so strict, it's assigned at conception, which is really interesting, is to reject God's rights as creator. Whoa. Okay, to assign gender. Okay, it's God's right to assign the genders. I just have a lot of questions about that, including the fact that in Jewish theology, there's definitely more than two genders. Jesus himself says that some people are not men and women, and some people are born as both. Like, you have people who have both genders when they're born, and some people are genetically one gender, but their body is physically something else. Like, there's a lot of exceptions to this that exist without people even being transgender or non-binary. You know what I mean? Like, historically, before equal rights for LGBTQ people existed outside of the gender binary. So it's really interesting that they make it so black and white and so wrong. Anyway, that's my little rant on that. Now, the brand new thing that was added to the handbook after I was a student was the expectations of employees and students. Because the positions set forth in this statement are grounded in the biblical, moral, and ethical commands clearly taught and demanded, there's nothing clearly taught and demanded in Scripture except like love your neighbor as yourself, which Jesus said was the one first command. Bob Jones expects all employees and students enrolled to agree with and abide by this statement on marriage, human sexuality, and gender identity. In their mind, I think there is something specifically on their social media policy that you're not allowed to make any public statements on your private social media that would be contrary to their handbook. When I was a student, that was not in the handbook. They had their statement on what marriage is and their statement on being pro-life, but they didn't have a statement saying, we expect all students to agree with this, and we expect all students to overtly agree with this. So as a senior, I started questioning a lot of things. I was deconstructing. I was realizing my sexuality and realizing that I kind of disagreed with a lot of these things, but I was a senior. I had just realized I disagreed with all of this my junior year, my second semester, my junior year. You cannot transfer your junior year and still graduate at the same time, and I did not have the financial means or the family support to transfer, so my goal was to graduate, and if I disagreed, to live differently. But I also didn't realize I wasn't allowed to say that I disagreed. So my senior year, I said some stuff on Twitter that openly disagreed with them. I wasn't naming Bob Jones. Bob Jones was never identified on my Twitter. So I said things like, Happy Pride on June 1st. I said to all the people in the closet and out of the closet, I'm so proud of you and I love you. And the thing was, I was in the closet at the time and I knew it. I thought I was bisexual. I was still working out what I was, and I said that on June 1st as a message to both myself and to everyone else. But that statement got flagged by the university, and I ended up almost getting kicked out my senior year. I ended up going through a 4.5-hour meeting with the head of student life. I got on disciplinary probation. I had to pay a fine. I had to remove all my statements from Twitter. I was fired from my student leadership positions, and I was on, as I said, on probation. I had to go through required counseling, and I was forcibly outed to the administration, where I was either forced to openly state that I was not gay or state that I was straight, and I could say neither, so I had to go through counseling because of that. And that is the story of how they changed the handbook. But because when I was a student, the handbook did not say that you were not allowed to disagree with them. And in fact, when I was written up for my disciplinary probation, the documents that I had to sign that testified that, yes, I understood why I was in trouble and blah, 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 and I had to sign paperwork, it normally lists a rule, like you had sex off campus, or you drank when you weren't supposed to because drinking is not allowed, or you got a piercing when you weren't supposed to. The rule it said I had broken was that I had violated the spirit of the student handbook, which is not a rule, that's just something they pulled out of thin air. And then they later revised the handbook to specifically state that disagreeing on social media with them is breaking the rules. So that is the story of how I almost got kicked out of college, how the college changed its rules because of me, and that leads into why in 2021 I joined the Religious Exemption Accountability Project, and we filed a lawsuit against the Department of Education for allowing these kind of schools to accept federal money and then discriminate against LGBTQ plus students. And I personally don't see a difference between what Bob Jones does to its current LGBTQ students and what it did to interracial students in the 70s when it wouldn't allow interracial dating. Like, to me, there's no difference between discriminating against a student who says, I think I'm gay, and discriminating against a student who says, I am black and I want to date a white student, or anything like that. I think it's all discrimination. Anyway, that's my personal opinion, and maybe the federal government will agree with us in our lawsuit, but currently the Department of Education does not agree with us and is actively fighting for discrimination in court. So that's where the Department of Education stands. And yeah, that's a decision made under the Biden administration, so we can only imagine what decision would be made under a non-democratic administration. Thanks for watching today's video. It's a little long rant about my educational experience. What I learned at Bob Jones is you can violate rules without them being written. Thanks for watching. No thanks to Bob Jones for discriminating against its students. There are people who pay money to follow these rules. I mean, I paid money to follow these rules. So if you enjoyed this video, let me know below if there was anything that surprised you, or if you have follow-up questions, be sure to let me know in the comments, and maybe I will try to get a response. I'll either tell you in a video or reply in the comments. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't, because you're gonna get more chaotic little videos that I'm not sure where they came from. I just pulled them out of my head. Today's video I've been thinking about for a while, and I'm glad I filmed it because I've never really talked about Bob Jones on here before, and I wanted to. So there you go, you're welcome. And you can also check me out on Instagram and check out my Patreon. Both of them are very fun. More exciting things are in the works, so stay tuned, and I'll see y'all all around the internet. See ya.
We're sorry. You have reached a number that has been disconnected or is no longer in service.